here for you. These are the Telehealth Resource Centers. There's 12 of us plus 2 national level ones. Please always feel free to contact your resource centers when you need help. Next slide. Just some tips about the webinar. Please, your phone and or computer microphone has been muted by the host. There is time reserved at the end for Q&A. You can use the chat function. That's probably the easiest way to get questions to us. On the very last slide, we will be presenting a link for a survey. This helps us immensely with guiding our webinars, topics that you might want to see dealt with, how effectively this webinar was, and so on, and the information. I would like to note that the webinar is being recorded, and that the recording will be posted to our YouTube channel, and the link is there that you can see. You can access it as well from a number of the TRC websites. It is my absolute pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Jonathan Linkous. He has a bachelor's degree in business administration from Franklin University in Columbus, Ohio. Master's degree in public administration from the American University in Washington, D.C. And he's also had additional postgraduate work at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas in Austin. A lot of us know him from his work at the American Telemedicine Association. He is an authority on the use of telecommunications technology and its use in healthcare services. He's lectured, he has advocated, he has written on these topics in all sorts of venues. He was the founding chief executive officer of the American Telemedicine Association, and under his guidance for 24 years of leadership, it grew to be the foremost international resource and advocacy organization to promote the advancement of telehealth and remote medical technologies. He is widely credited with helping transform the delivery of healthcare via the use of telemedicine. He is currently CEO of Linkous Health, where he serves as a senior advisor and board member to a variety of healthcare organizations and technology organizations around the United States, Middle East, and Asia. He is currently working with an organization called PATH, which he is going to tell us about today. And it is my absolute pleasure. Like I said, I've known Jonathan for a whole bunch of those 24 years as CEO of the American Telemedicine Association. And now that he's gone off into a new adventure, I thought it would be really nice to have him talk to the NCTRCs and their constituents about what this new adventure is all about and how he sees the future of healthcare with robotics, artificial intelligence, and the role of PATH. Jonathan.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Elizabeth. And you're right. You've been a good friend for a long time. I will start with a little bit of me on screen. And I really appreciate the opportunity for the Telehealth Resource Centers to be able to speak to you. Yes, I've been in telemedicine for a long time, and it started out with we just had cups and a string between them, and then it moved on from there. Who knew? But I want to talk a little bit about what's happened since I was at PATH and what's happening, or since I was at ATA, and what's happening now with PATH and why it was formed. I joined up with Marianne Liebert, and you may know Marianne or her company, or at least many of her journals. She has about 100 medical journals, including the Telemedicine and eHealth Journal. And we got together and I started talking about what's the next step after telemedicine. And really, if you look around where the technology is, where a lot of healthcare is, we're really talking about things like artificial intelligence and robotics and some of the other sensors and some of the other technologies. And it really seems like as we move further ahead, all these different technologies are converging, or a confluence, as Marianne would say. And so that's why we really formed PATH. So I got together with some friends and a few folks like Jay Sanders, many of you know Jay, and Sue Siegel, who's the head of innovation for GE. Well, at least she was, she just left a while back. and a number of other folks who have been really key in the industry, key in healthcare and technology, including Steve Klasko, who is the CEO of Jefferson Health out of Philadelphia. And so we really decided to create PATH, which is a partnership for advanced technology for telemedicine, AI, and robotics. And it's really meant as a partnership. The people there, although they join as members, we really consider them partners, because as we move ahead, it's kind of all of us together, not any one titular head that's dictating, and really trying to make a difference in the world. So we do a lot of what I did at telemedicine in terms of advocacy, in terms of publishing. We have a journal, which is Healthcare Transformation, and a number of other things. And we can talk about that later. But today I want to talk really a little bit about where we are with this whole confluence of healthcare, and where we're going with some of the things that are happening as we speak, I guess. So let me start in. I look at the transition in technology for healthcare as 5 steps. The first one was telecommunications. And I know that's kind of funny, because a lot of people, when they say telehealth or telemedicine, they think about two-way video, but it really started with the invention of the phone, if you think about it. From Dr. Watson calling out an emergency because he'd spilled some acid, at least the story goes, into something more modern. And of course, doctors all use the telephone to talk to their patients, it seems like, at some time or other. And so I say, well, you're using telemedicine. And then we move on to the world of telemedicine and telehealth. And then we get into data collection and the assessment of all of this, the use of sensors and EHRs. And certainly we've had, I don't know how many billions of dollars we spent on that in the last 10, 15 years. But there's a lot. And it's been good in a way that it's created a good platform for where we're going to go from here. And I think that where we're going to go from here is robotics and automation. Not that it's taking the place of telemedicine, but I think it's growing out of a lot of that work in telemedicine. And then really into computer intelligence, whether you call it augmented or autonomous. And I'll mention that in a little bit as well. The use of technology in medicine is as old as the telephone, yet the consumer fear about AI has been really stoked by horror stories and the what ifs. And I'll play for you one of those horror stories right now.
AI doesn't have to be evil to destroy humanity. If AI has a goal and humanity just happens to be in the way, it will destroy humanity as a matter of course, without even thinking about it. No hard feelings. It's just like if we're building a road and an anthill happens to be in the way, we don't hate ants. We're just building a road. And so goodbye, anthill.
Well, I don't know that really represents a lot of people in technology. And of course, the ironic thing is that was Elon Musk, as I'm sure many of you know, and he is not only inventor of things like Tesla, but he's been a huge investor in artificial intelligence. So a lot of this has unfortunately sent out a scare and a lot of misinformation about what artificial intelligence does. There's a thing called, I think it's important to kind of put this in perspective, that the word Autoland, for example, is not just a used car lot. Autoland is something that many consumers don't know about, but they're already dependent on it and a lot of other applications in artificial intelligence. 68% of the consumers are already using AI, but they don't even know it. Autoland is a system, an AI system used on almost every commercial jetliner. It's an AI system that flies the plane after takeoff, and in many cases, it lands the plane. And here are 2 examples of why you really want Autoland. One is a plane that quite didn't make it to the hangar. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. And the other one is what you see out of the cockpit a lot of times when you're trying to land a plane. And so it's really become really an important integral part, I say critical, to a lot of airlines as they fly across the country and they get into almost uncertain times. And a lot of those passengers may not even understand or know that AI is, at least in part, flying the plane. So we moved from there to healthcare. And as I said, it's really what I consider the convergence of technologies. We had telemedicine, we got robotics and AI, and they were all acting independently, but now they're starting to work together. And I think that's where we're going to end up in my presentation. And by the way, Elizabeth, I don't know if people are going to ask questions during the presentation, which is fine with me, or if they're going to wait to the end. That's kind of up to you as to how you want to handle it. So
the easiest way is probably at the end, and we'll use the chat function.
Okay, so I will take a long time so you all forget your questions by the time we get to the end. That's my strategy, just to set it forth. When we talk about robotics, so let's talk about robotics first. If you look at robotics, of course, the biggest thing is in industry. In the last year, the sales of industry robots increased 31%, and that's across the world. In the US, it reached about 6% increase, and in China, it rose 58%. And that's kind of, I think, indicative of kind of where we are with a lot of technological change in both industry and healthcare. China is going full bore on what it's doing right now. I had the pleasure, I guess, or the interesting opportunity to go into China last December. And I toured one of their new hospitals they're building for the military. And I went into a facility that was used for their automation and healthcare. And it was incredible. It was, I'm still blown away with what I've seen. The machines that are 3 stories tall in terms of interventional radiology and a lot of things that's amazing. And of course, there are things like that are happening in the United States, but it's become a real national priority in China. Anyway, this is one area we're all familiar with, using robots to make cars. This is an interesting piece. This is a robotics warehouse. It's an Amazon warehouse where you send the orders in and it goes to one of these wonderful little robots here. That's number 1344. And it goes off to where the information is stored, or the stuff that you want to buy is stored. It takes it all, it boxes it, it puts it off to the place that's packaging it, and they have a new machine that's actually taking this and packaging it and putting a postage on it, all without people doing this. It's an amazing sight, and when you go into a huge factory, it's even more amazing as you see what's happening. So that's one thing that's going on in industry. And I think it's important to talk about how this is really moving into the next world. This is my favorite little guy, Wall-E, and many of you remember him from the movies. And I think he's indicative of kind of, unfortunately, he was the robot at the end of the world, I think. But I think we're really fortunate to have a future vision of some things in telemedicine and robotics. And we'll come back to Wall-E in a little bit later. Then we go into healthcare. When you talk about robotics, the first thing a lot of people think about is robotic surgery. This is the Da Vinci robot, that many of you know, and many of you probably have one in your own hospital. Yulin Wang, who is now within Touch, was one of the ones who developed the robot, and it has gone a long way since then. But that's only one part. Here is an exoskeleton that's being used more and more, helping people walk. And there's a number of different versions of this. This is just one. And that's one other application of robotics in healthcare. And then we have the next iteration, which is this little fella who is used in a number of hospitals. This was actually in Japan where it's used, and it's to distribute medicine and other supplies within the hospital among various rooms and various nursing stations. And it's been in use for a long time. It's very common in China, and I keep saying China, in Japan, but it's also common in other places as well. And it's increasingly being used here. I've seen it in one hospital so far, and I think another version of it, and I think we're going to get more and more of those. And here's another version of where robotics is being used in many nursing homes or senior centers in Japan.
It is able to have simple conversation, and the entertainment program is tools which people can enjoy the interaction. Many of the elderly are hesitant communicating with the staff, worried.
So it's interesting in that we see these things, and it's kind of funny, but the people who are looking at it after the first shock, maybe, or first couple of days, they really become very used to it. And that's one of the things that's been true in a lot of things that are in robotics and artificial intelligence. I'll talk about a chatbot a little bit later, about how a lot of these things seem a little foreign to it, but once you're involved in it and interactive with it, it becomes just another part of the world, and you don't pay attention to the fact that it's a robot. And this is one of my favorite movies, Robot and Frank, and if you haven't seen that, I recommend it. The guy is actually a retired robber, and his son puts in this robot. This is in the future, because he's starting to be frail. I think he's got a little Alzheimer and some other things going on. And the robot helps him. Of course, in the end, the robot helps him steal, which is a bad sign. But nevertheless, he gets used to it, and it just becomes another companion. So it's just an example of some of the things that robots and robotics are coming on. And of course, as we see more and more, the robots are now using artificial intelligence as they move through. So let's look a little bit at AI, because that's really where a lot of the scene is. And I want to remind you that PATH is not an AI focus. It's a focus on telemedicine and AI and robotics. And our focus is not one, it's really the convergence of all of them. And what do we have to do with overcoming the barriers and promoting the applications of it, and promoting the, I guess, integration of these technologies into ongoing healthcare. I mean, the success stories that we look for are where these technologies are fully integrated into a health system or a private physician's office, where they just use it day to day and they don't sense it as something really exciting and new. It's just healthcare. You know, when ATA was first founded, Jay Sanders and I would talk a lot, and I'm sure Ron Einstein was there too. And we would say, if we're really successful, it won't be telemedicine, it's just healthcare. And I think the same is true with the technologies we're talking about here. It's really another step. So as we move to AI, I think it's important to talk about where healthcare is, and one of the challenges that PATH is facing right now. This is a chart of AI adoption. I have a couple of these to show you. This shows the various industries and where they are with the AI. You see at the top, of course, is high tech and telecom, and no surprise there. On automotive, when you look at the robotics, they're using AI as part of that. That makes sense. Financial services, a lot of the financial markets are driven by AI and algorithms. And we're getting into retail. As you check out of a retail, in a lot of places you don't check out by a regular line anymore. It's all done electronically, where it scans your items and gives you a total. And of course, all the rest of them you see. Down at the bottom are an interesting group. In the middle is healthcare, which means they have a very low adoption of technology right now. And it's no surprise probably to everybody on this webinar that healthcare is a late adopter of technology. Certainly for 25 years, I have felt it and lived it, but it's just one of the things we live with right now. It's one of the areas. This is another firm put out what they call the AI adoption, and it's the percent of the firms that are adopting one or more AI technology at scale and a core part of their business, and is weighted by the firm's size. So you go to the right, and you get the size of the firms, and high tech and telecommunications again is one of the largest. And then the other side is the top, the bottom is the size of the industry, and across the bottom is the percentage of the firms that are actually adopting technology at scale. Healthcare again is toward the middle, going toward the back of where we are. And again, more and more when you see this, you see who's adopting this advanced technology and who isn't, and you see healthcare is falling behind. Now, the ironic thing is another study, there's been 2 or 3 studies that have verified this. Which field will benefit the most from artificial intelligence? And lo and behold, medicine is number one, followed by military, which is actually a high user of AI, and automobile, hacking, which I don't think is a real industry, but nevertheless, it is an area. Psychiatry is 3%, which is actually surprising to me because of all the things that are going on in cyber psychiatry and in filmmaking. But it just shows that although healthcare is very late in adopting technology, the potential for it is immense. And that's where we are, trying to get that immensity moved into real world. So why are hospitals suddenly starting to move toward uses of all these technologies, be they automation or telemedicine or robotics? And there's a number of drivers. I mean, the technology is considerably cheaper. There are more studies and pilots that have shown that it works. There's some regulations that have been improved and quickened, and people are starting to get used to it. But one thing that's pretty obvious to me, and I think probably to most of the people on this webinar, is that health systems are now running a little afraid of what's behind them. And this, I thought, was a very interesting study that's worth sharing. 88% of the executives in healthcare agree that their organizations are vulnerable to consumer-friendly offerings from non-hospital competitors. And of course, the four largest ones are Amazon, CVS, United Health Group, and Optum. Now, the last two obviously are in healthcare. Maybe you consider CVS too a little bit. But the top one is Amazon, which is enormously investing in the use of healthcare, or the applications that can be used in healthcare. CVS, which has undergone a complete transformation. My wife works for CVS, so I'm aware of some of those. And they're turning it from a drugstore really into a healthcare store. And the plans are they'll eventually get rid of the front office or the front store that sells toys and candy and food and other things, and moving into a healthcare store. And now that they've converged with Aetna, and they're all part of the same group, or will be soon, as they're starting to work together, I think that's only going to build their brand. Now, outside the United States, if you look at other companies like Babylon or some of the other ones in other parts of the world, they're doing the same thing. The large companies are trying to get into the healthcare. Walmart is another example. I used to work with Walmart with some of their healthcare team, and I know that internally they have said that they want to be the #1 primary care provider in the country. They've been a long time getting there, because sometimes it takes them a long time to get started, and sometimes they drop it, but I think they're pretty determined to do more and more. And that's why you'll see them starting to move into kiosks and to another even more interesting applications in the future that's in healthcare. And a lot of those are driven because they're related to technology or used to using advanced technology. A lot of them will be using things like telemedicine, robotics, and AI in their offerings. And that gives them a bit of a competitive advantage. There's always a competitive advantage for a new entrant into a market, because they aren't burdened with a lot of the traditional systems. Hospitals have, or health systems have hospitals, and unlike a number of years ago, there's not a problem with getting hospital beds. In many cases, at least some areas of the country, there's actually an overburden of having too many hospital beds. So, of course, they're moving to outpatient and a lot of other things, but we're seeing that transformation. And so it wouldn't be surprising to me as we move forward to see other entities starting to get a larger and larger share of the healthcare marketplace. All of that is incentives to invest, incentives to move forward, and really move ahead. So as we move to technology, and AI specifically, AI is really part of a larger trend. And I guess the interesting thing about it is technology is looked at askance by a lot of traditional medicine. And for AI, and in particularly, it's very interesting that the American Medical Association has a committee on AI, but they don't call it that exactly. They call it augmented intelligence. They call it augmented because it won't replace the doctor, is going to augment what the doctor does. So in their view, the doctor should always be the one in charge, and therefore the computers augment what the doctor says. And I think that's an admirable view in many ways. But I think when you look at it in a lot of practices, at least in other industries, in some areas in healthcare, it's looked at more as an artificial intelligence or autonomous intelligence that may have relied on, interacted with the physician and the provider at one point. And there are other areas, other points where the computer or the robot can pretty much carry on its own. Still a little frightening, but that's really where we're at with a lot of the research and pilots and the things that I've seen that are now being demonstrated, is where the robot goes, or the AI system goes where no man has gone before, I guess. And it's interesting to say, because as we look at it, and particularly the convergence of AI and telemedicine, you think about what are the reasons, why are they really moving that way? And I just wanted to take a minute to go over some of that. I think I call it 5 reasons to really move in the convergence of AI and telemedicine. First is making better diagnoses. That's really important, because when you combine remote monitoring with machine learning, then you can really improve technology. At ATA and in telemedicine, we're really focusing on the 3 pillars of healthcare, but the most one was access. Getting people who could not access healthcare, be they in rural areas or be they in even inner cities where they can't get out necessarily, getting them access to healthcare they couldn't get before. But it's still using access to doctors over video, or maybe a nurse or something, but still the people involving that. And it helped some with quality because they could get access to care. But if you add that and augment it with artificial intelligence, all of a sudden you're delivering care that could be a lot better than what you get otherwise. And the other one is recommending treatments, because if you look at the PR that IBM Watson puts out about what they can do in terms of doing a plan, some of it's a little hyped, but it really is infusing telemedicine platforms with machine learning to improve the diagnosis and with less human effort. And so you get into efficiencies, which is really a keynote for a lot of these convergence activities. And you look at how they can do it not only to get better, but could then adapt to recommended treatments over time and then move forward to, again, better healthcare. Another reason that, and this is starting to be used in hospitals in a lot of places, is solving logistical challenges. That's the third area, and that's reducing, for example, hospital wait times and administrative headaches by automating the process. And there's a lot of examples. Probably some of you have lots of examples, and maybe some of you are already in use. Then helping with elder care, and I showed you the picture earlier of someone in elder care that was using robots in Japan, and surprisingly, it's used more and more in Japan. I haven't seen much of it in use in the United States, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are more of that that's coming about. At some point, telemedicine in the form of robots will be essential to providing home care. And preventing burnout, I think, is the last one. And you see a lot of doctors who've signed up to the on-care or online healthcare applications by any number of providers. And they combat burnout. But then when you combine it with AI and telemedicine, it really becomes much more powerful and takes a lot of the burden of physicians' work. It really is then augmented, and it takes a lot of the burden of their work off of them as they move ahead. So I think all of that is an important nuance as to what's going on. So we look at some of the applications that are around right now. I think one of which is certainly the radiology. That's the most advanced use of AI, and Elizabeth, I'm sure, can echo that and have a lot of her own numbers on it. But it's amazing. There's a couple of, at last year's PATH conference, we had a presentation by a number of folks who were in radiology. And they talked a lot about where we are and some of the algorithms that are in place. And there's some experimental areas, but there's also some places that have now come around to it's actually in use on a regular basis. And one of the things I comment on and gives an example of in California for breast imaging, when radiologists used to review the imaging, the law was if you saw anything that was unusual or looked at, maybe you found something wrong, a polyp or something, you would have to have it overread by a second radiologist. Because that's how you wouldn't get paid without that. You had to have a second reading for anything like that. Now they've replaced that by allowing you to have it overread by AI. So you can actually use AI in part to help lower some of the costs and I think improve the quality of the reading. Not to say that AI is right now at the point of replacing radiologists at the moment, but I think anybody in radiology can see some of that coming. And again, Elizabeth, you could probably comment on that a lot more as we move ahead. Then as we move ahead, this is another area, by the way, there's somebody looking at an image, which is looking at imaging with AI that's augmented with it. And you look at other applications in healthcare, certainly in intensive care units, review of ICU, because that has so many different streams of data, even from one person, and the typical person who's using, particularly if you're doing remote ICU monitoring, you're looking over multiple patients at the same time, all of which has critical needs and lots of data flowing in from all of them. And AI is often used to help the critical care doctor or the intensivist make decisions. They can prompt them with suggestions or lay out certain data in a certain way they hadn't seen before and help those decision making. That is now in use in a lot of remote ICU applications, and it will be more and more. It's what I call the successful uses because it's integrated and it's used, and at some point they don't even think about it when they move into this type of job. They just assume that that's going to be part of what they're doing, is getting helped. Certainly saw ICU monitoring in neurology, absolutely, and even dermatology and cardiology. You see applications with AI, and of course teamed up with telemedicine. Certainly when looking at stroke, for example, and telestroke applications. They're in the hospitals. There are several of them right now that are integrating AI and some robotics as well with that. And dermatology, looking at a lesion, or you're having a lot of cameras that are becoming intelligent, so they can spot lesions and also do a diagnosis of them and a readout. And some of the results of those are now reaching the point where it's equal to a human. And I'm suppose there may be a couple that are actually surpassing a human in such like Mohs or one of the other applications of it. Cardiology has been around for a while doing a lot of this applications, and both in robotics as well as AI. If you look to operations that are minimally invasive operations are using that. And now we're going into primary and chronic care. There are applications that are actually going out into the home. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's coming on, and it's coming on quick. I mean, it was talked about 5 years ago. It's being, in many cases, prototyped, and we're now going into pilot sites. And there are some of them that are actually being adopted. And I think the next 5 years is going to have a complete revolution of what we're doing in AI and healthcare. Then there's a completely autonomous applications. And I have to start out with Dr. Spock. Anybody who is a fan of Star Trek will recognize that little recorder that he has there is something that he can wave over somebody and they will instantly tell them what will happen and what their status of health is, and maybe recommend a treatment. And that was all a thing of science fiction, but about 5-8 years ago, ATA co-sponsored the Qualcomm contest. It was one of these big contests that they sponsored, me being part of it, to identify a device that would look at and assess a person's health. I think the requirements were 30 different conditions, 30 or 40 different conditions, and they were going to award the winner, I think it was 10 million or something. And but the equipment, the diagnostic tool, had to be at a low cost and available to go into homes. There were 3 finalists in that. They didn't reach 40 conditions, but they were all very close to that. So we're not quite at that yet, but we're really close in the goal of having a tricorder for humans. And I was very happy that ATA had a part of that. And it's an important thing of where we're going. And of course, that's loaded into all sorts of technologies. In many cases, the technology did not require taking a blood. It was something that would use other sources of doing things, as we do now. You can look at for glucose levels without actually taking blood. So there's some interesting things that are going on in that area. So now we go into really, and I did this just to amaze you. If you're falling asleep, you can look at this deeply, and then maybe other things will happen. I don't know. But anyway, I wanted to get into really what we're talking about in some of the future and some of the applications that are going on that are in telemedicine and in AI and robotics and are actually in use. This is a device that's manufactured by a company, IDEX, and they were the first AI application or technology in healthcare that was approved by the Food and Drug Administration. They were approved about 2 years ago now. They were approved for use, and the company has grown since then. It automates the assessment of a number of eye diseases, but they will look at it for diagnostic retinopathy is what this is advertised for, and I think it's what it's tested for. That the patient looks into it, it'll take the picture, it'll do the assessment, and comes out with the reading. Now, is it paid for that service? That's another issue, and that's another thing that PATH is involved in. But that machine is up and running and is being deployed in many places. I always said that if I do my work properly in moving these technologies, I'll have a lot of medical societies mad at us. And I think in part we were successful because the optometrists and the ophthalmologists are not real happy with this machine. Partly it's between the two, the optometrists and the ophthalmologists, because each of them wants to know who's going to get paid for this work. And there's been a lot of stories behind the scenes of what's happened. But I think it's revolutionized and got them all upset. But I think the next step is they're going to accept it and figure out how they can work with it, which is the real success. It's disruptive. And a lot of this AI applications and telemedicine applications are very disruptive. But they only really work as if they can be disruptive and then be adapted and integrated into the healthcare system. Because being disruptive alone is not really the answer. And then we look at other applications for telemedicine and AI and home care into the home. There's 2 companies, 2 of my favorite companies, and I've worked with them in the past. I've worked with both of these companies. CareAngel, which is located, I believe, down in Florida. They have a chatbot that they use to check on elderly patients or people who are homebound. And the chatbot is called Angel. They'll call the home. They'll say, "Hi, Mrs. Jones, how are you today?" And Mrs. Jones will talk to it, and it has an interactive applications and algorithms in it that they can actually carry on a conversation. And of course, Mrs. Jones might tell them when they took their medicine and if they took it, and if they have any other aches or pains for the day, the routine. It'll call it back at some point the next day or a couple of days and pick up on their conversation. Like they were saying, "Well, how is that meeting coming along?" Or "How are you there?" And what's amazing is that in the applications, I've seen this. The patients just talk to it like it's a person calling them. And they give them the information they need for monitoring of the healthcare status of the patient on a regular basis. So it's kind of amazing when you see some of these things in action and seeing what they do. AI Cure is out of New York, and they're a little bit more futuristic. They use facial recognition models, and they have applications that'll go onto your iPhone or other digital product, and they record your face, so it'll recognize your face when it goes on. And then and this is important for certain people who are required to take certain medications, and you have to monitor to make sure they do. So you talk to it, and you can hold up a pill, and it'll assess, is that the right pill or not, by looking at it. And then the patient takes it and swallows it, and it'll know if you've actually taken the medicine or not. So it's kind of a narrow focus for what they can do, but it's amazing what can happen when you combine a lot of these technologies. This is distance learning, distance-based rather, and it is also certainly a lot of advanced AI, machine intelligence that's involved in a lot of these things. So that's just a couple of examples of what we see on the horizon. This is one of my favorite examples. This is, if you might know this person, it's Albert Einstein. He doesn't quite look the same, but that has him, and he will talk to this child and talk to him about education. This is a little bit more of an education application, but it's just the start of the future. And there can be interactivity. It is kind of a chat bot. It'll work with you. And if you don't like what it's doing, it'll even stick out its tongue. Sorry, I had to add that in. So we're really on a new relationship of man and machine, really where we're going. And I see it on a daily basis, and it's exciting. It's really exciting to me to see where this is going. And a couple of interesting comments. I'll kind of close this out not too long here. No one will hire you because of what you know. And that's because of Google. There is so much intelligence that are floating out there that's instantly available. It's amazing. It's amazing what my 12-year-old daughter will tell me that I never knew about things that she's looked up. It's kind of scary in a way, and it doesn't help when you have a 12-year-old that thinks she knows more than her dad, but that's another story. Because knowledge transfer is just completely out. What you really got to know is what to do with the knowledge. So really it moves the workforce in healthcare and other industries to a different world. It's not what you know, but what you are going to do with what you know. And the other area is the very common comment that you see in articles about radiology, about interventional radiology, or anything in healthcare about the use of automation or robots or AI or even telemedicine. It says AI won't replace providers anytime soon. You can Google it. You will find probably 100 references to articles or news magazine pieces or something that will make that claim. And I think that's probably true. I'm not doubting that it's true, but I think you need to define what soon is. That's the real issue. For example, here's a study that was done at Boston Consulting, MIT Sloan, about the effect of AI on industry. And you'll see the different industries that are labeled on the left. Healthcare is the fifth one down. And you'll look at the percentage of organizations that think AI adoption will have a big effect today, or whatever, 10% will have it today or very soon. And then you go up to those that think it'll have a big effect in 5 years. And you see healthcare is moving from 12% of the organizations that think it's going to have an effect today. When you get in 5 years from now, we're talking about 50, 60% of healthcare organizations. So I think it is going to have a major impact. Of course, it's going to have an impact on job security. Maybe not for the highly advanced brain surgeons, okay, but for the people who are out front and taking your information as a person comes in, and they are forced to fill out that same form they did every other place, even though the entire system has an Epic system or a Cerner system or whatever the EHR system is. And yet that's the way it works in a lot of places. You have to fill out the same forms you always did, turn it in, and then you have to go into another room where you have to wait for longer, and a nurse comes and sees you, and they will take your blood pressure and your weight and a number of other items. And of course, all of that can be done automated, and it can be done better. It have the effects, the readout will be better. It's not based upon somebody's writing something down. And that can be done. So that'll certainly be one of the first areas that is affected by the use of automation and AI in healthcare. And as we move on, of all the professions, of the medical profession itself, probably, again, brain surgeon won't be affected first, radiologist may be. There's certain types of radiologists, for sure, who are just doing reads. So I think all of that is coming upon healthcare, and it'll coming on quick. It's not a question of just knowing it, but what are you going to do about it yourself if you're in one of these areas? I think that's really important. And here is my last thing, because I think one of the dangers of AI, and I've seen this so many times, is that AI can, or even telemedicine, can lead us into an area of complacency. And it's dangerous. And this is the one danger I do believe in, that may be long term, but I think it's coming quicker. And that's its effect on humans. So I told you it would get back to Wall-E. And if you don't know what the Wall-E movie is, the population of the world had to go off into space for, I don't know, 10 generations or something to avoid the toxic air of Earth, and then they were gradually going back. But what happened to them on the ship while they were gone, where everything is done for them, well, you can see what's happened.
Make a place
And the best part of that is, in my opinion, Wall-E's reaction. And maybe that's a little too futuristic, but I think it does concern one of the areas that many people talk about is when everything is done for you, what are we going to be doing? It's just like when all the information is given to you, what are you going to know and learn to do about it? Here's something that we put together a number of years ago, is that we look at the future. The health center of the future is made possible by technology. And I think that's where we're looking for. We don't see operations done in the home at the moment, but one of the Wired magazine always has a little comical thing in the back. And one of them is a group of movers that are moving in a home operating system into the house, where everybody will have their own little operating system where everything can be done on them and to them all in the house. We're not there yet, but we're certainly in the diagnostics and advice and consulting and counseling. And so many of those that are in the home, on a handheld or mobile device, or built into homes, as we're looking at some of the newer advanced homes that are being built. So I think that's where we're going. And I think that's one of the areas that PATH is hoping to accelerate as we move ahead. So with that, I'll have to end with a little advertisement of PATH. The International Summit and Trade Show is going to be this December. We had one last year. This is our second one. It's still going to be not as big as what I'm used to with ATA, but I think we're growing and we're going to be there pretty quick, because it really is an amazing field, and we have an amazing number of people who are speakers, some of which you know, and I think a lot of them you may not know because they're in a whole other fields that are moving ahead. So I encourage you, if you're interested, if you want to submit a presentation, you have another week, I think, or so to submit a presentation. We've extended that, particularly for people who were involved in a Southwest Telehealth series, their showcase and their summit on telemedicine. And I think that goes to everybody else. PATH also has a journal, Healthcare Transformation, which is, I'm the editor-in-chief. Steve Klasko, who is, again, the CEO of Jefferson Health, is the founding editor-in-chief and is still on the editorial board. We have an editorial board of outstanding people that are moving ahead. And of course, again, you see the past summit that's there. So we're moving ahead. It's an interesting organization. If anybody's interested in joining, I would say if you really want to join, the individual membership has been cut in half for the next week. I think we have about 1 week left on a discount. So it's down to $87 for $87.50, I think, for the first year. So if you're interested in that, you just go online, go on Say you want to be an individual member, you go to the checkout area, you put in the code word telemed, and you'll get knocked down 50%. Of course, if you want to be a corporate member, we can do the same deal for you. So anything you want to do, we will move ahead on. So that's a little bit about PATH. There's our website. Feel free to go to it, ask questions or anything else you want to know. And I think at this point, Elizabeth, you're going to take over with a couple of comments.
Yes, comments and questions. Well, thank you very much. That was a absolutely wonderful overview of AI, robotics, and just some cutting edge technology, and clearly shows your expertise in this area, and we obviously wish you well with PATH. A couple questions. Does our PATH membership include access to the journal?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Another question. Somebody was wondering, do you know the status of IBM Watson these days? Its role in healthcare and so on.
That is a very interesting and somewhat loaded question. Tiptoeing around it, IBM's put a lot of money into this, and they've had some successes. There's been some problems. I think they would admit the fact there's been some problems. They had a major hospital in Texas that pulled out of using them, which I think that was a major hit. Certainly was some major earthquake among the healthcare community. So but I wouldn't count them out for sure. They are working. They've had some problems in development of their algorithms. They're based on somewhat of a narrow base, but it's a big question. I couldn't say. I'm not about to recommend selling or buying IBM based upon what I know. And I wouldn't do it anyway because I'm not really dumb, just appear dumb, but I'm not really. And so that's the best answer I can tell you. It's had some problems. I think stay tuned to what happens in the future. There's been a lot of changes in the technology world. GE, who was founding the pre-platinum member of PATH, and I hope they continue, but they're going through a whirlwind of problems right now. Yeah. And most of the people I knew in the healthcare and innovation side have left. So I don't know what's going to happen there. And of course, areas like Qualcomm has sold off Qualcomm Health, and that's a whole different world too. So you're seeing a lot of changes in all of these industries, particularly in the technology industry that's getting into healthcare. We've seen that back and forth, certainly with areas like Apple and Amazon to some extent, and Google and Microsoft. I mean, I've worked very closely a while back with Microsoft and knew some of their projections and hopes, and they didn't meet it. And a lot of those people are gone. Google has gone through healthcare staff probably 4 or 5 times with a lot of different innovations. And that's not unusual when you have a new technology, new things growing, particularly with industry that doesn't know healthcare, that's trying to get into healthcare. You're going to have a lot of failures and a lot of changes. So anything like that, I don't consider, whether it's IBM or Apple or any of them, they're going to stumble, but that doesn't mean the industry is in trouble. That's just a natural part of industry. I'm not that old, but I kind of remember when automobiles were invented, and I think they had some of the same problems. I'll finish there.
I think it's very common. I think a lot of these companies, they think healthcare is a lot easier than they think. That, oh, finance can do it. Finance, you can just go into the ATM, get money, your data's transferred here, there, and everywhere. We can do it in healthcare. And then wham, they hit that brick wall. Another question. You talked a lot about robotics and how some medical societies may not really like AI, robotics, and all that stuff. If you were an advisor to the AMA, what would you say to them to engage them to facilitate technology adoption?
Somebody who doesn't like me planted that question. Gee, well, I got to hand it to AMA is they're really trying. They're losing members, unfortunately, by the buckets, and they're really trying, and they've inaugurated a lot of interesting things. I was participating a couple years ago in a panel that they had in Chicago about technology. They've launched an innovation center, an incubator. They have a new policy on AI, which, as I've mentioned, is augmented intelligence, is what they call it. I think they're making their start, but I think they really have to Well, traditionally in anything dealing with technology and automation, the earlier you recognize what the impact is and deal with it, it's better than trying to oppose it. AMA, as most of the people on this call know, AMA fought telemedicine. It was going to fight it to the death, and it wasn't the death of telemedicine. And now they've gradually accepted it because they figured out, oh, it's going to better pay for the people who are doing telemedicine. They're not completely over it. State medical boards have been doing the same thing, but a lot of those hurdles have been overcome. There's still more to go, but I think we're on the other side of that problem. And I think the sooner AMA looks at it and figures out what's their niche as we move into this world, the better.
Okay, we only have time for a few more questions. You kind of answered the one about who's a leader in AI. It's kind of all over the field right now. What are your thoughts on blockchain, and will it impact healthcare delivery?
Oh, well, okay, it'll impact healthcare for sure.
You know how?
And it's impacted primarily in the area of billing and automation. Moving into the delivery of healthcare is a little bit longer of a jump, but I think it'll have a similar impact. I think there's a little bit of there's certainly an overlap between blockchain, machine learning, and AI. But I think blockchain is going to have an impact. I'm not sure how soon it's going to be, but it's moving in that direction. And again, most of the applications that have been successful I've seen have been working in automating the administrative tasks or billing tasks. But certainly in the radiology world, I'm sure, Elizabeth, you can point out a couple yourself.
Oh, there's quite a few. Yeah, no, I think it's going to have a huge impact as well. What happened with Xanadu and other tricorder finalists? Do you know?
Those companies are still there. They're still working on it. They're hoping to be bought. You know, every startup company has an exit plan, and that exit plan is their hope to get bought by somebody who's going to give them a lot of money. And sometimes that happens, but very rarely. I think there's a shakeout. There's been a shakeout in the last year in the telemedicine, telehealth, AI world of a lot of mergers and acquisitions and a lot of bankruptcies. I think we're going to have much more of that in this next year. And I think those companies, there's several of them who are ripe for takeover or purchase or whatever it's going to be into a larger arena, because none of these are all organizations that were created to develop a technology. And as you kind of alluded to, developing a technology is not the same as getting it implemented and integrated into the healthcare world, because you do have to know how healthcare works. And I'm sure everybody on this webinar knows finding out how healthcare works is a big chore. Yeah. And for big companies, it doesn't always work. I got to share one quick story. When Apple came out with the Apple Watch, and I'm wearing an Apple Watch, so maybe I can say that. Anyway, when Apple came out with the Apple Watch, they had a lot of technology or applications in there that related to healthcare. It does have a few now, but it partnered with Cleveland Clinic and a number of other places. And at some point along the way, and I don't know how close this was to the rollout, they realized suddenly that they needed FDA clearance because these were medical applications. And so obviously they had to take a step back with some of that. Now they haven't stopped because they're working actively with FDA right now on a couple of things. But I think that's just an example of, you got to know the healthcare world. Yeah,
and the whole FDA issue with all of this is a huge issue. Well, unfortunately, it is up to our hour. So I would like to invite everyone to the next webinar, which is going to be ETHAN, a great acronym for Emergency Telehealth and Navigation. This will be on Thursday, September 19th at 11 to 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Also, as Jonathan mentioned, the PATH meeting is coming up. There's also another meeting, the Search meeting, which is associating with Sprout this year. That's going to be in Chicago, September 11 to 13th. Plenty of time to still register. Jonathan, again, thank you so very much for your time, your wisdom, and your sharing with us. You could go to the last slide for people to...
Oh,
there's one more slide.
I just got rid of the last slide. I'm so sorry.
Always one more slide.
There it is.
There we go. Thank you again. And there were a couple questions that we didn't get to answer. One was a really nice comment. Let me just kind of read it. In 1925, Dr. Hugo Gernsback conceptualized a device called the teledactyl that would allow for doctors to see their patients through a screen and touch them through miles away through robotic arms. So people might want to look up 1925 Dr. Gernsback. And then I know there was one last question about potential risks of hospitals utilizing technology from non-hospital competition. I think all of us have a lot of ideas about that one, but potentially we could give you the person who asked that and you could get in touch with them. So again, everyone, thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see everyone in September for the next webinar.